guys. Welcome to our second episode of Ask a CMA. That's right, I am no longer a BFI, I'm a CMA. If you want to know more about that, watch the video that was posted last week, Ask a CMA Episode 1, with my awesome mother, Dana Long. I recommend you watch that anyway. But today, as you can tell, I'm in my house, I'm by myself. No special guest this episode. You all will probably see the cat come in and out, but that's a common occurrence. So, for today's episode, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit just about my story, my life, how I ended up here in Corpus Christi, Texas. I'm going to try to answer some of the same questions that I ask my guests, and I'm hoping that, maybe from you all seeing my experiences or hearing my experiences, maybe, it'll influence you in a positive way. So, I was born in 1988 on Fort Knox military base in Fort Knox, Kentucky. My dad was a sergeant in the Army. He got out of the military whenever I was 5 years old. At that time, we moved to a little town called Junction City, Kentucky. Junction City has one stoplight in the entire town. The big news growing up is whenever we got a gas station that had a Hardee's, which is like a burger place. I don't think we have Hardee's down here in Corpus Christi. Carl's Jr., you might have heard of that. Same restaurant. And that was the big news, and that was my life growing up. Small town kid. Whenever my dad got out of the military, we moved back to Junction City, like I said, and we ended up staying for a little bit in my mother's parents' house, and we stayed in the basement until my dad was able to find a job and we were able to get work. Whenever my dad got out of the military, he had struggled with some things, and he grew up in a church called the Salvation Army. After he got out of the military and he had came back, he started going to the Salvation Army again. And he would go every single time the doors were open. And he accepted Christ and completely changed his life around. And I got to see firsthand what God's transformative power looks like. And I got to see my dad's growth, and part of, having a parent that is part of the Salvation Army or any other church really is anytime they're at church, that means you're at church. So I grew up from the age of 5 until 32, which is how old I am now. I grew up in the Salvation Army. I was there for Sunday schools. I was there for Bible studies. I was there, of course, for worship service, for youth programs, everything. Growing up, as a kid, I was a very quiet, imaginative kid. And I would go and I would hear these stories about God and about the Bible, and I loved the story of Moses. That really caught my attention. And I would use my imagination, and in my mind I could see, what it must have looked like in those times. Whenever they would tell these stories from the Bible, I would, in my mind, I could picture it like a movie. And I was interested. But I never really knew God. I knew about Him. I knew the songs we sang. I knew the Bible verses. I knew the prayers. I didn't really know Him. And at that time, it started something in my life that I still struggle with to this day, of feeling like I wasn't good enough. You see, whenever I was young and I would see my dad go to church and He also coached football, and I saw him working with the kids at the church, and I always wondered, well, how come he had to come to church to change? Were we not good enough? Because at that age, I was too young to realize that God should come first in everything. But also, some things only God can do. And only God could truly transform my father like he did. I had a mother. Well, I still have a mother. But my mother, who was on last week, as I said on that episode, my mom was meant to be a mother. She's got the biggest heart out of anyone I know, and she's an amazing person. But growing up, we always had my cousins at the house, staying with us, living with us, all the time. And my mom worked as a teacher's assistant in the schools, right? And she loved those kids so much that sometimes they would come over to the house to get a meal, to get help with homework. And I didn't view it at that time as my mom helping others. Instead, I viewed it as, once again, I'm not good enough. My mom has to go out and bring other kids in because obviously I'm not good enough. I have a brother. My brother is, and no offense to anybody who watches this, my brother is the one person on this world that I love above every other. My brother, me and him have a special bond that nobody can ever understand. I don't understand it. But my brother's autistic. He can't communicate like maybe you and I can. He can't sit down and just have a regular conversation. But I've always known what my brother's thinking and what he's feeling. We've always been connected that way. But growing up, seeing my brother, I always wondered, well, how come even though my brother, he's older than me, why am I the one taking care of him? And I was bitter about that. As much as I love my brother, and I love him to death, and I wouldn't change him for the world, I was bitter. And I was angry. And I was so overprotective of him. I remember getting into fights all the time as a kid with my neighbors if they even mentioned my brother's name. Didn't even have to be in a bad way. But if they even said my brother's name, I would get mad. And I think a lot of that was insecurity about not understanding the importance my brother had in my life. So during this time, as these feelings are starting, I'm still going to church. And I'm still observing, and I'm still, enjoying it. And I can still picture the movies that I've got going on in my head from the Bible stories and everything. But just, it wasn't connecting with me on a true level. Which also, once again, made me feel like I'm not good enough. So I saw how my dad changed. My mom found God. I saw people at the church who would go on about the Holy Spirit and feeling His presence, and I would see people cry, and I never felt anything. And I thought maybe I'm not good enough for God. Whenever I was 10, I went through a couple things that I don't really want to talk about on here, but just went through a couple incidents, and it changed me. See, I stopped really even caring to go to church at all. I didn't see the point. Because obviously, God didn't care about me. I didn't feel like my parents cared about me. I knew my brother cared about me, even though he couldn't show it in a regular way, or he couldn't tell me straight up. Once again, we have that connection. And I felt like that's all I had in life was my brother. So I still went to church just so I didn't have to hear my dad fuss at me. I still went. I could play along. I could play a Christian. It was easy. Sing the songs, say the prayers, put a smile on your face every now and then. Act like you're having a good time, but I didn't want to be there. I didn't care. And then about at the age of 12, I found something that made me feel accepted by people. And that was alcohol and marijuana and a couple other drugs. You see, all my friends were older than me. Whenever I was in 6th grade, they were sophomores in high school. Whenever I was in the 7th, they were juniors. So I was able to go to these high school parties with them. And whenever I would drink, that feeling of not being good enough went away, and I felt accepted. And I felt like people were looking at me differently, and I liked it. So that's what I did. Throughout, starting at 12 years old, up until my early 20s, that's what I did. Because I felt accepted. But the more I turned to things like that, to alcohol and drugs, the further and further away from God I got. But I just didn't care. Because I didn't think God cared about me. I mean, if God cared about me, why would He give me a brother who couldn't express love and who I had to take care of? If God loved me, then how come my mother always had to take care of somebody else? If God loved me, then how come my father, it always seemed like he spent his time out of the house? That's how I felt. But whenever I would drink or do anything else, I didn't feel that way anymore. I felt what I thought was good. High school was tough. I didn't really make friends that much, and to be fair, I didn't really try to make friends that much. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to make friends without drinking. I didn't know how to make friends without, being the crazy guy at the party, or the guy who's snapped and punched someone or punched something again. I didn't know how to make friends. So being in high school, it was miserable. I was around all these people I didn't care about, who I thought didn't care about me, when in fact they didn't know me well enough to care about me because I didn't let anyone get close. I graduated high school, got accepted to a couple colleges, but unfortunately wasn't able to go because of finances. I got accepted, and this is kind of a funny story, just to give us a little bit of a break. I got accepted to Asbury University. I got accepted to Florida, or the University of South Florida, and I got accepted to the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. So, all over the map. Originally, I didn't want to be in Kentucky. I wanted out. And I wanted to be a marine biologist. There's the cat. So I thought, Florida, it's hot, it's sunny, and there's beaches. Alaska, it's beautiful, it's cold, but there's a lot of wildlife. But I ended up also applying to a place called Asbury University, which is about 45 minutes from my hometown, and I always grew up going there and, seeing the college kids who had come from Asbury down and to the church. And in fact, one of those is Lieutenant Laura Gesner, who is my officer now here in Corpus. But still, whenever I wasn't able to go to college, I always felt once again like I wasn't good enough. Like, well, maybe I'm just supposed to be in Kentucky. I'm just supposed to stay in a one-stoplight town. And I'm just supposed to survive till I die. That's what I thought life was. Don't worry. The story has a happy ending. I started working at the same factory my dad worked at and still works at, Hitachi Automotive. And I absolutely hated it. I worked with some great people, but I absolutely hated working there. At the same time, my mental state really started to go downhill. A lot to do with drinking, with drugs, but also just with not dealing with my mental issues, with depression, with anxiety, with other things. And my mental state started to deteriorate so bad. I like to joke about it now, but I remember one time I thought somebody was following me home. One time I would get in about 6 in the morning after working all night. And one time I went to take a shower and I thought somebody was trying to break in the bathroom on me. I find those stories funny now, but at the time that's where I was mentally. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't there. So I quit. Not only did I quit my job, I also realized that the drinking and the smoking pot and the doing other things were starting to really deteriorate my mind. And I needed help. I was able to quit the substances, but I still couldn't admit that I needed help with my mental state. Now we're going to start getting into the happy side of my life. Now we're going to start getting into how I ended up in Corpus Christi. And it starts, oh my gosh, 11 years, 11 years ago now? 10 years ago? I got a job at a summer camp called Camp Paradise Valley in Kentucky and Tennessee. You see, the Salvation Army is broke up into territories here in the United States. We've got the southern, the western, the central, and the eastern. And each territory has its own division. So Texas is its own division in the southern territory. Florida is, Georgia, and then there's Kentucky and Tennessee, where I am from. And each division has its own summer camp. And I got a job there working as a maintenance guy. My job was to do yard work to kind of help out around there. And it can be argued whether I helped out a lot. Some people think I did, some people think I didn't. That's fine either way. But something happened to me my first summer at Camp Paradise Valley. You see, at Camp Paradise Valley, not knowing this really, but going into it, I knew it was a summer camp for kids, but I thought I was going to be a maintenance guy. I didn't have to deal with kids. I didn't want to deal with kids. I wanted nothing to do with them. But luckily, I was forced to deal with them. And I met this one kid from Memphis. And he sat at my table during meals, and me and him just kind of bonded. And one day, his counselor came up to me and said, "Hey, he wants to talk to you." And I went, "Okay." So I pulled up in my golf cart, and he came out of the cabin, and he sat down beside me in the golf cart. And he started talking to me, and he started talking to me about his life. And he started talking about how he didn't feel like he was good enough. And he started talking about all the things that he was going through in his life. And in that moment, I felt God. I sat there and I listened to this kid. And I talked to him. And as soon as I was done talking to him, I went back to my room, went into the bathroom, closed the door, and I cried. And I called out to God, and for the first time, I heard God calling back. And from that moment on, I knew God was real. And I knew God cared about me. And I started going back to the church. And I started playing in the praise band. And I really liked that. And I started trying to learn more about God. And the more I learned this time, the more I actually felt closer to God. And the more I felt closer to God, the more I felt closer to my family. And the easier it was to get to know people. And the easier it was to talk to people. Fast forward a couple years. I get offered a job in a place called Richmond, Kentucky as a BFI, or a youth pastor in the Salvation Army. Richmond was a tough place, man. I was there for about 2 years. I didn't have a month where I didn't lose a kid. Most of them to CPS. My first week, I'm driving the van, I'm dropping kids off, and the police and a social worker come and take 2 girls off my van. It weighed a lot on me. And something happened again. You see, during this time, even though I had stopped drinking, I had stopped doing drugs, I'd really stopped hanging out with some of the friends I was. I had gotten closer with God. There was still one issue that I didn't address. You see, my mental state, I still refused to accept I needed help. Part of the reason was because whenever I was in high school and I did take medication, I started to abuse that medication. I no longer used it as medication. I used it as a drug. But something happened to me in Richmond, and I don't really want to go through the event. But there was an incident where I went to go pick up kids, and it was just a bad day. At the same time, I was thinking about becoming a Salvation Army officer, and I told I was going to get moved to a place called Johnson City, Tennessee. And I was going to have to work at the summer camp for the summer. None of those things I wanted to do. But I went with it. And my mental state was really bad. So I went to Johnson City. Or first, I worked at the camp for the summer, and it was the worst summer of my life. The only reason I got through it was because of a youth that I knew since he was 12 years old who is now passed. His name was Damian Jackson. And Damian was the only reason I got through that summer. But I got through the summer, and I went to Johnson City, Tennessee. I was there for a week. The entire time I was there, I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop. It was like I couldn't breathe. I'd be sitting there, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I would start seeing faces that weren't there, and I would start panicking. And I felt like I was trapped, and I kept reliving certain things. So I told the officers there, who were absolutely great with me, I told them I had to leave. And they understood perfectly, and they could not have been nicer to me. And I moved back to Kentucky. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I tried a couple jobs, but they didn't work out. One job, I actually had a panic attack on the floor. I started seeing faces again, and I started reliving things while I was there on the floor, and I had to go. And I quit. And it was then I realized that I needed help. So I started taking medication. And I stopped trying to hide my feelings, and I started talking about how I was feeling with people. And I started to get better. I had less and less panic attacks. I had less and less episodes. I wasn't as angry. I was able to calm down. And you take that with getting to know God and my growing relationship with God, and my life for the first time started to feel like I was doing okay. And then while I was working at a thrift store part-time with my cousin, Tessa, shout out to my cousin, I felt God telling me something again. See, I knew a couple people called Bill and Stephanie Mockabee who had meant a lot in my life and still do. And they were down in Texas, and they were running the summer camp for the Salvation Army here in Texas. And I called Bill one day. Or I texted him. I can't remember. Knowing me, it was probably a text because I don't like talking on the phone. But I just asked him, hey, do you have any jobs? Do you need me to come down and do anything? And he went, I need a security guard. I need a nighttime security guy. You'll drive around the camp at night. Just make sure everything's okay. And I came down out of faith, quit my job even though it was a part-time, it was still a job. I quit that to come down here and work a seasonal job that I knew was going to be done in 2 months. Did not make a lot of financial sense, but I just felt God telling me I needed to do it. So I did. And I came down and I had a great summer. It was so stress-free. I was able to think. I had a lot of time where it was just me on a golf cart at night in Texas. And Texans, y'all are some egotistical people when it comes to your state, but Texas is beautiful. And I had so much time to think and clear my head and just talk more with God. And then something happened. I got offered 2 jobs. One in Odessa, one in Corpus Christi. I visited Odessa, and I didn't know the officers there, but I knew of them, and I knew they were really good friends with some officers I'd had before and some people I knew. And I went and I visited them, and they are awesome people. Anyway, and they were awesome people. And then I came to Corpus Christi, which I didn't know anybody down here. I didn't know of anybody who knew anybody down here. Lieutenant Laura had went to Asbury, like I said earlier, but I didn't really remember her. And I came down and I felt God tell me this is the place I needed to be. So I said yes. I packed up my car, drove 19 hours. I got here on a Sunday or on a Monday night. Tuesday morning, I was asked to be in the office, and I don't think I've stopped since. But it's been a fabulous time, man. And it's been so wonderful. And I've got to know God so much while I've been down here and see His work and get to know some fabulous, wonderful people who I would never have known if I didn't listen to God. So guys, that's my story. That's how I ended up here in Corpus Christi. I know it's kind of a long video, and I'm sorry, but I hope you all got something out of this. Guys, as always, stay safe. If you need to talk to somebody, reach out.